In the last decade or so, Indian schools and colleges have witnessed a rise in theatre in the curriculum, introducing youngsters to the art form. Moreover, inspired by theatre groups producing iconic actors like Irfan Khan, Nasiruddin Shah, Rajkumar Rao, Anupam Kher, India is witnessing a rise in private theatre groups and acting institutes. How do you think this evolving culture might create a change in the industry?
Uh, that's, dissertations have been written on this subject. It's a great question. If I can kind of simplify the question, as I understand, is basically the evolution of theater and the way we teach theater in India, in Mumbai. And that's gone through a remarkable change. It goes through a change every generation. There used to be very Parsi and Gujarati theaters, and NSD, founding of NSD, changed things quite a lot. But in the past 15 years, I've personally witnessed, I think the number one thing you can say is the influence of globalization and the influence of technology. So on globalization, I would say about 15 years ago, a lot of Indian actors began to study abroad. And they would go to RADA, they would go to Stella Adler, they would go to Meisner, some of the European schools, we'll call it. And they would bring back what they learned and start incorporating that into theater here. And so you had a very organic process where you had an Indian style of acting, which, for example, with Adi Shakti or something like that, can be very well rooted in, even Ayurvedic and Vedic thought and philosophies. It's completely Indian. It's very indigenous school of acting and philosophy, really. Or you might have something, let's say, like Parsi or Gujarati theater, or folk theater, or something which is still distinctly Indian. But now you have the introduction of Western approaches to acting. And I would simplify it as basically saying that the West, generally speaking, has an approach of inside out, and India and the East in general, meaning kabuki and other kinds of theater in Japan and China and elsewhere, has an outside in approach. So outside in would be, you could even see it, for example, in Bharatanatyam dances, the idea of mudras, some external form to indicate the inward emotion. And I'm communicating either narratively a story, but also a feeling and an emotion through the positioning of your body, through the motions, the things outside in. And there's definitely a role for that in acting. But since Stanislavski, in Western school of thought, the approach was generate the feeling from the inside, and it will find some expression, sometimes a surprising expression. But the more true you are to that feeling, the more natural you are expressing it, the more impact it will have on the audience. And especially even more so with the camera, which catches everything. So the inside out approach was brought into the Indian theater scene really in the past 15 years, just by students coming and going. And also, to be fair, there have been foreign teachers who've come here. Barry John is probably the most famous one. He's been around, I think, 35, 40 years. And there's been others who've come, sometimes as guest lecturers, things like that. So you have this cross-pollination of ideas. And to be fair, I should also say that Indians going to the West, and sometimes even staying there, have also affected the way it's taught there. But certainly the theater scene here has been changed by an increasing idea of how things are done in the West, and the intersection between theater and, I would say, movement, like dance and those kind of performances. So mask and clown workshops, those kind of things have kind of blended more. So that's the migration side. The other side, which is huge, is OTT. Streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon and Disney and Hotstar have basically, you have a generation of kids, let's say, I don't know, an average 12-year-old kid right now is, watching some Hollywood series, which I'm not even aware of, and they're picking up on how acting is done. And it actually changes the tastes of the Indian audiences. I would say in the past, maybe say 1980s, let's say those kind of masala movies, the taste was very loud, what we would call loud, or sometimes people say melodramatic, sometimes they say it in a disparaging way. I don't mean it that way. I just mean that it's that kind of acting, and we know what that is. And the Indian audience has actually kind of has pulled back from that a little bit. I think not just because of American cinema, but the rise of, say, Korean dramas and Japanese cinema and European cinema. So we have a more global palette. The taste of what we consider to be good acting has changed a lot. And that's continuing to change for better and for worse. But those are the influences I think that have affected theater the most in the past 10, 15 years. And those are things that I absolutely like incorporate in how I teach acting. Fully acknowledging the Indian tradition, but saying, this is how I come about it, this is my approach, and sharing, essentially my observations and learnings through my own experience and bringing that in some way. I wouldn't call it a kitschy, but I'm just trying to make it more accessible for the Indian students.